The aroma of freshly baked apple pie still hung heavy in the air, but tonight the scent was not comforting. It was a symphony of danger and betrayal. As the aroma danced in the air, a tremor of unease snaked its way into the heart of Jamie. It's all of the life she has carefully built, a meticulously constructed deception. She was living a double life, a life of carefully concealed secrets. Her other life, as Jane, the architect, was living in the vibrant city of New Orleans, a world away from her carefully planned facade of suburban life. The scent of jasmine and the rhythms of jazz replaced the smell of laundry detergent and the school run. She had been carefully managing her double life for years. For many years, the existence of the Jamie life and the Jane life seemed to manage in parallel. She kept the worlds separate, and they were doing everything to make sure this world-away life never collided. The constant travel, the stolen moments, the lies whispered on the phone under the guise of work trips, it was exhausting, a tightrope walk over a chasm of potential exposure, but it was also thrilling. The suspension was constant, a fear of something going wrong, a fear that the world could unravel. A misplaced email, a misplaced phone call, a familiar face in the wrong place, and a careful balance act. It was gnawing away at her. The tremor that started was the day when the worlds began to collide. There was the misdelivered package, a client in New Orleans scheduled to visit her Connecticut office, and a shared car service that accidentally linked the two identities. Suddenly, the coincidences were not manageable, they became relentless, a tightening noose, and the carefully constructed lies started unraveling. And now, the phone call. The phone call changed everything. A hushed voice, filled with panic, on the other end, a voice that was panicked. They know, Jane. They know about everything. The threat was clear. The people she was involved with in New Orleans, the ones she thought she could trust, were dangerous. Their business, their dealings, were far darker than she had ever imagined. Suddenly, her double life wasn't about avoiding detection, it was about survival. Now Jamie has a dilemma, one that she is going to struggle with, to solve. Jamie has to choose what to do with her world. Will she have to go to New Orleans? Reveal everything? Will she need to run or disappear completely? Or accept the offer to help her associates eliminate the loose ends in her Connecticut life? The decision was agonizing. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a kaleidoscope of faces, demands, and threats. The once familiar scent of her home, her children, her husband became a symbol of both everything she desperately wanted to protect and everything she was about to destroy. Then came the twist. One late night, she stumbled upon a hidden compartment in David's office. Inside, she found a burner phone, a stack of untraceable cash, and a file containing compromising pictures of her. It was the evidence she never wanted to see. David, her seemingly perfect husband, had been living a double life of his own. He knew about Jane. He knew about Liam. He was somehow connected to the very people who were threatening her. The world tilted on its axis. Was he controlling this the whole time? Was their carefully constructed facade merely a shared deception? Her moral dilemma now reached its crescendo. She was trapped in a web of deceit, the predator and the prey indistinguishable. She had to choose, save her family from whatever danger David's double life presented or escape with Liam and abandon the people she now knew were not safe. In the end, she chose action. Armed with the knowledge of David's secret, she used it not to confront him but to manipulate the situation, to buy time, and to plan. She understood now that her double life wasn't a choice but a necessity. In the game they were playing, only one person could survive. And Jamie, the woman of two names, was determined that person would be her. The apple pie, now cold, sat untouched on the counter, a silent witness to the dangerous game she was about to play. The next move, her next identity, was the only way to survive. The cold apple pie seemed to mock Jamie from the counter, a stark reminder of the life she was fighting to preserve, and perhaps, the life she was already losing. The burner phone lay on the kitchen table, its sleek black surface reflecting her haunted gaze. It was the lifeline to a world she simultaneously craved and feared. Her plan, born in the crucible of desperation, was a delicate dance of deception upon deception. She couldn't confront David directly, that would be playing into his hands, revealing her awareness and potentially endangering Lily and Tom. Instead, she had to leverage his secret against him, turning his own game back on him. First, the phone. She knew, based on the file she'd found, that David used the burner to communicate with his associates, the shadowy figures who knew about Jane and, more importantly, knew about her connection to Liam. She spent the next few days studying his habits, noting the times he used the phone, the hushed tones he employed, the location he favored, the detached garage, always locked, always with the door slightly ajar. One stormy evening, as thunder rolled and rain lashed against the windows, she made her move. David was at a corporate dinner, a convenient alibi. Armed with the knowledge gleaned from the file and the burner phone, Jamie slipped out of the house, the rain plastering her clothes to her skin. The garage door creaked open, the scent of motor oil and damp concrete filling her lungs. Inside, she found the phone nestled on a workbench. Her hands, trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline, navigated the unfamiliar interface. The call logs were cryptic, filled with numbers she didn't recognize. But the text messages, they were a treasure trove. They mentioned meetings, coded phrases, and, most chillingly, a new directive, loose ends to be tied up. The architect knows too much. Her breath hitched. They were planning something. And it involved her. She quickly snapped pictures of the messages with her phone, carefully wiping her fingerprints from the burner phone before replacing it exactly as she'd found it. Back in the house, heart hammering against her ribs, she accessed her encrypted messaging app. She needed to reach Liam to warn him. The message was short, coded, and devastating. They know. Get out. Now. The response was immediate. What's happening? Where are you? She couldn't tell him everything. Not yet. I'll explain later. Just trust me. Leave New Orleans. Go somewhere safe. I'll find you. She knew, with a sinking certainty, that the next move was theirs. They would be watching, waiting for her to make a mistake, to expose herself. She needed a counter-move, a distraction. The next morning, she initiated the next phase of her plan. She confronted David, not with accusations, but with feigned ignorance. I found your phone, she said, her voice carefully controlled, tears welling in her eyes. What's going on, David? Who are these people? His reaction was swift and calculating. He denied everything, spun a tale of business dealings gone wrong, of threats against him and the family. He played the wounded husband, the victim of circumstance. It was a performance, and she knew it. But she played along, allowing him to believe he still had the upper hand. I need to know what's going on, she sobbed, clutching his arm. I want to help. Tell me everything. He hesitated, gauging her reaction. Then, he began to talk, weaving a narrative designed to reassure her, to keep her in the dark while simultaneously revealing just enough to pique her interest. He mentioned a client in New Orleans, a complicated business deal, and unpleasant people who needed to be handled. He never mentioned Jane, never mentioned Liam. But the pieces were falling into place. That night, she pretended to be asleep while David received a call on his burner phone. She listened, her heart pounding, as he agreed to meet someone he referred to only as Mr. Silva, at a secluded location outside of town. This was her opportunity. The next afternoon, she told David she needed to get out of the house so she could clear her head. The kids are fine, and I can drop them at my sister's," she said. She drove to the meetup location David had mentioned. The location had been a dead end. She spent the next few days watching, waiting. She followed David discreetly, always keeping a safe distance. She knew she couldn't risk being seen. The burner phone remained a constant presence, a source of both information and danger. She learned that Mr. Silva was the key. He was the one pulling the strings, the one who could expose her, destroy her, and the one who could save her. Finally, the phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. Mrs. Miller, a voice, smooth and menacing, asked. "Speaking," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We need to talk. Mr. Silva has a proposition for you." The trap had been sprung. The air in the dimly lit warehouse hung heavy with the scent of damp concrete and something metallic, something that made Jamie's stomach clench. Rain lashed against the grimy windows, mirroring the storm brewing inside her. Before her stood a figure in a tailored suit, the face obscured by the shadows, but the voice, that smooth, predatory voice, belonged to Mr. Silva. "Mrs. Miller," he began, his voice like silk over steel, "such a pleasure to finally meet you. Though, perhaps Jane would be more appropriate, considering the circumstances." He gestured with a gloved hand towards a chair. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." Jamie remained standing, her back ramrod straight. "I don't like being threatened, Mr. Silva." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Threats are for amateurs, Mrs. Miller. What I offer is an opportunity." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "David has been uncooperative. He's become a liability." Jamie's heart leaped. This was it. This was the moment to turn the tables. She knew, from the burner phone texts, that David was involved in some dangerous dealings. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that he wouldn't hesitate to betray her if it suited him. "And your proposition?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Silva leaned forward, the shadows briefly receding, revealing a face that was handsome in a cold, ruthless way. "David needs to disappear. Permanently. And we believe you're the perfect person to facilitate this." He laid out the details with a chilling precision. A staged accident, a fall from grace, a clean break. No messy complications, no loose ends. And the reward? Complete freedom. Her life as Jane would be restored, her connection with Liam secure, with a generous sum to start a new life far away from Connecticut. It was a brutal choice, but one that, in its perverse logic, made a horrible kind of sense. If she refused, she knew David would either betray her to protect himself or let these people eliminate her. She was being offered a way out, a chance to survive. To win, she had to play their game. "I understand," she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil raging inside. "And what about Liam?" A flicker of something, surprise, crossed Mr. Silva's face. "The musician? He is part of the package. He disappears with you." She took a deep breath. This was it. This was the gamble. "I accept." A slow smile spread across Mr. Silva's face. "Excellent. We knew you'd see the logic. Now, here's how we'll handle the details. On Friday night, David will be driving home from his business dinner." Jamie listened, absorbing every detail, every instruction, her mind already racing. She knew that to win, she had to survive this. She had to outmaneuver them all. On Friday, she carried out her part of the plan with icy precision. The poisoned coffee, the strategically placed key, the carefully orchestrated accident. She watched as David stumbled out of the house, his face contorted in pain, and then, nothing. The police arrived, the sirens wailing in the night, the scene a chaotic blur of flashing lights and frantic activity. She played the grieving wife perfectly, her tears genuine, her sorrow palpable. The next day, the deal had been struck. She was ready. On the day she was scheduled to leave for the airport to meet Liam in a safe house far away, Jamie packed her bags. She glanced around the house at the life she had built, the life she was leaving behind. The doorbell rang. She hesitated, her hand hovering over her concealed weapon. It was too early for the car that was scheduled to pick her up. Cautiously, she peered through the peephole. Standing on the porch was a woman, elegantly dressed, with a familiar face. It was Sarah, David's longtime secretary, a woman Jamie had always found to be too perfect. Too polished. Too something. Jamie opened the door. "Mrs. Miller," Sarah said, her voice calm, but there was a glint of steel in her eyes. "We need to talk. Mr. Silva is indisposed." Indisposed? Jamie's mind raced. Had something gone wrong? Was this a new threat? Sarah stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. David, you see, wasn't quite as cooperative as he led us to believe. He had, shall we say, a few cards up his sleeve. She gestured towards the living room. "You might want to sit down. This will take a while." Jamie's blood ran cold. This wasn't the ending she had planned for. This was something new, something she hadn't foreseen. "David was working with the FBI," Sarah continued, her voice laced with a chilling satisfaction. "He was trying to bring Mr. Silva and his associates down. He thought he could play both sides. He was always so predictable." Sarah's face broke into a cold smile. "You see, Mr. Silva was my brother. He knew everything that David had been up to. And your little game with the poisoned coffee, that was a nice touch." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, silver handgun. "But, as they say, two can play at that game, Jamie. David was going to use you to get to Silva and take down the entire organization, but I am here to close all loose ends." The room seemed to spin, and a cold sweat broke out on Jamie's forehead. Was this how it was all going to end? Betrayal after betrayal, a web of lies that had finally closed in on her. Her life, her two lives, had all been leading to this moment. "The proposition, I am here to offer you one of your own," she said, looking Jamie dead in the eye and with the smile of a serpent, and pulled the trigger. The next thing Jamie heard was silence. The last image that Jamie's eyes could see was that of Sarah leaning over her, and the phone, the burner phone, she had used to call Liam, was buzzing with the same number, Mr. Silva's number, and the face was a picture of Liam. He had a smile on his face. The picture of all of them had been used to bring down the cartel and bring her here. Sarah was David, and Liam was the FBI. In the end, Jamie's double life, her deceptions, and her desperate bid for survival had all been for nothing.